Please welcome to the stage ASHE Council for Ethnic Participation Chair, Dr. Natasha Kroom, and ASHE Council on Public Policy in Higher Education Vice Chair, Dr. Leticia Bustillos.
Good morning. I am Natasha Kroom. I use she, her pronouns. I am a caramel-coated Black woman with dark brown and auburn hair, clear eyeglass frames, pink lipstick, and a white sweater. We are currently on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Dakota peoples, the original inhabitants and stewards of the land and waterways of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Throughout the past 2 years, we've been able to engage more deeply on the land on which we are occupying. I want to extend my appreciation to the members of the local and community engagement committees from this year and last for helping us to center the Dakota people in this work. This year, I am honored to serve as chair of ASHE's Council for Ethnic Participation, or CEP. CEP is dedicated to fostering the active involvement of scholars from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups in higher education. CEP provides essential opportunities for networking, mentoring, and professional development, particularly through its signature program, the Mentor Protege Program. This program is designed to build meaningful relationships that support both emerging and established scholars in navigating the complexities of academic life, such as advancing research agendas, enhancing publication strategies, and preparing for the academic job market. CEP also hosts an annual pre-conference each year, and our pre-conference remains the largest within ASHE. I'd like to thank this year's CEP Executive Committee for their partnership in our work this year. This leadership team has helped not only our fellow CEP members, but the entire ASHE community to enhance diversity and inclusion within ASHE and strengthen the field by ensuring diverse voices and perspectives are represented. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Leticia Bustillos. I use she, her pronouns. I am Latina, light brown skin, long dark hair, wearing a pink dress and shoes, and I have to wear glasses because I can't see a thing without them. Thank you for being here so bright and early on a Saturday morning, especially after some of the receptions last night. We have an amazing and engaging conversation this morning, so we promise this is worth waking up for. I have the honor of serving as Vice Chair of ASHE's Council on Public Policy in Higher Education, or CPPHE. CPPHE plays a critical role in promoting research and advancing understanding of public policy in ASHE. It serves as a key platform for researchers, policy analysts, and policymakers to exchange ideas, share research findings, and discuss pressing public policy issues affecting higher education. We do this through our annual pre-conference, which was held earlier this week. We also do this through the Graduate Student Policy Seminar, a long-standing and impactful event that connects the next generation of higher education policy researchers with leaders in the field. I'd also like to thank the CPPHE Executive Committee. This group of ASHE members has been instrumental in planning our activities this year, including the pre-con, GSPS, and our annual award. Thank you so much for your hard work. Now, we are so excited to welcome to the stage today's panelists and moderator. I am excited to introduce today's session moderator, Dr. Tiffany Davis. Dr. Davis is a clinical full professor and associate dean for student belonging and success at the University of Houston. Dr. Davis's scholarship addresses two major strands. First, issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion within post-secondary contexts, and second, socialization and professional pathways for the higher education profession. Through these lenses, she has been able to explore a range of topics including college access, the experiences of Black students, intercollegiate athletics, student affairs graduate preparation, self-care, supervision, institutional diversity, and faculty experiences and career development within the Academy, particularly among minoritized faculty. Thank you, Dr. Davis, for guiding today's conversation.
Award-winning journalist, author, and provocative cultural critic, Joan Morgan's work, passion, and commitment to the accurate documentation of hip-hop culture, combined with her adept cultural criticism, have established her as an expert at the intersection of hip-hop and gender. Morgan first started to explore the issues of race and gender at the onset of her professional writing career as a freelancer for The Village Voice, quickly solidifying her reputation as a Black feminist writer unafraid of tackling the most highly charged topics. 2 years later, her insightful coverage of the rape trial of Mike Tyson earned her an Emma from the National Women's Political Caucus. Morgan coined the term hip-hop feminism in 1999 when she published the groundbreaking book, When Chickenheads Come Home to Roost, which has been used in college coursework across the country. Fresh, witty, and irreverent, it marked the literary debut of one of the most original, perceptive, and engaging young social commentators in America today. Please join me, us rather, in welcoming Joan Morgan.
Good morning, ASHE. Am I on? I am. Good morning, and thank you so much for being with us this morning. I am excited to be able to have this conversation with Dr. Joan Morgan. First, I want to thank our session sponsors because this really wouldn't have been possible without them. And so the University of Missouri and the University of Maryland's College of Education. So thank you for sponsoring this session. So we're going to get right in. And as you know, the theme of our conference is I am a scholar. And so I would love to first have you kind of start out and tell us, what does being a scholar mean, and how have you embraced this identity for yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Am I on? Can everyone hear me? Thank you for making it out early. I see coffee on the table, so I know. So I actually was a journalist for a very long time before I went to grad school, which actually was prompted not because I necessarily wanted to be a scholar, if I'm completely honest about it. It was 2008, and the economy was crashing, but journalism, the fact that journalism was going to change with the onslaught of like digital media, the writing was just on the wall. And quite frankly, the impetus first and foremost was economic. I became a journalist at a time where it's never been easy to be a writer, but I could make a living as a freelance journalist. I think the New York Times, maybe 10 years ago, ran an article saying that the journalists who made $60,000, $70,000 a year in, I don't know, 2001, late 90s, is now making $20,000 and has to do about 3 times the amount of work. So in dollars and cents, I went from making maybe $2 to $3 a word by the end of my career to now platforms offering cents on the word. I started at $1 at a word at magazine articles, and then our articles then were, a short article was maybe 1,500 words, a long article might have been 4,000. And now a long article is maybe 750 words. So the crisis was impending. I had a sort of foothold in academia because Chickenheads had been taught there for a long time. And then the second reason I went is because I was just tired of talking about hip hop and feminism. And I wanted institutional support to really dive into another area that I had found myself coming back to as a public feminist, which is talking about a politics of pleasure in Black feminist thought and Black feminist theory. I felt that we weren't talking about pleasure, that we were constantly talking about misogyny, a kind of misappropriation of our images, hypersexualization of our images, but we had no language around, suppose it's just sexual and not hypersexual. And it took me a while to realize that what I wanted to talk about in grad school and what I was talking about publicly was the same thing. So I did go in with a completely different idea of what my research topic would be, and then, like a lot of grad students, changed. But it was a way to kind of bring harmony into my life, give myself a kind of institutional support. But I have to say, for my first 3, maybe even 4 years of grad school, professors just kept asking me, like, okay, honestly, why are you here? Like, they kind of looked at it as a step back in some ways. Because I had a pretty successful career, so that it was a lot of, well, why would you want to start again? Yeah.
And I hear that, and I think one of the goals of this conference is to really dismantle the titles and the hierarchies within being a scholar, right? And so identifying and seeing ways that community engagement, activism, even journalism is a scholarly act, because like you said, it's like you had already done this before you became a doctoral student and engaging in your dissertation work. So as you think about what your scholarhood, that's one of the titles, we say, what is your scholarhood? Who do you want to be? What do you want your research to do? I want to start back. I know we've talked about hip-hop feminism, and kind of most of folks in this room, that's how we came to your work. And when Chickenheads came to Roost, and Black women empowerment, and we started there. What do you see, and then we're going to progress into what you're kind of doing now, because there's some really engaging and interesting things. What do you see as how people can even still use hip-hop feminism in this academic scholarly space? What is how does it fit? What might be some tensions in using it now?
So I want to just go back to something you said earlier, because I want to be completely clear. Like, a lot of people would say things like, you've already done this work, you have a book that has been in the academy. At that point when I entered, it had been in the academy for over a decade. Why? They should just give you a PhD. And I want to say,
so nice.
I want to say something that, as much as there were parts of grad school that I really did not like, which is no reflection of my department, which was the School of Cultural Analysis at NYU. I mean, literally, I was in a department of rock stars. And so I didn't get a lot of the hazing that some of friends I know who went back to school, or friends who went a more traditional scholar did. It had nothing to do with that. I didn't like the language of academia. I cannot stand academic writing. I think it is unnecessarily dense, ridiculous. A 17-line sentence in any other context is a run-on sentence.
Guilty. Very guilty.
And I think that the idea of masking that kind of obtuseness in theory to sacrifice clarity is a real mistake. And so I definitely felt like I was experiencing a colonization of my tongue. I write very sharply and clearly as a writer, and I came in with that. And I didn't want to have to compromise that to use jargon, which, quite frankly, in my classes, like, a lot of people didn't understand the jargon. Like, I would just raise my hand and be like, can you just talk to me like I'm 12 and tell me what you really mean by this? And a lot of times people couldn't do it. And so that part of academia I didn't love, but I certainly came out a much sharper writer and thinker. And like, I think I went in, I'm Jamaican, so pardon, there's not the kind of violence in this analogy as you may think. But I went in with one machete, and grad school gave me another, and they sharpened each other. And so I think I always was good at building arguments, because as journalists, who do a kind of cultural criticism. That's what you do. But I became really, really good at it after grad school. And I think that I became, you know, we had a lot of negotiations around language, and I chose as my chair my beloved Jennifer Morgan, who is just a renowned historian, but a very traditional historian. And we would have to have real conversations about, I was like, I will give you those 2 lines of jargon, but these 3 lines I'm not changing. And she's writing a trade book now, which is actually really great, because the roles are sort of switched. But it was important to me that someone who was picking up that dissertation, who was struggling with whether or not there was a place for them in academia, recognized the language, recognized that I refused to not bring my full self into my writing. Like, it was contrary to any other practice that I had been a writer at that point for over 25 years. And so it takes longer to make a dissertation sing, but I can't write things that don't sing. It's my stuff. That's what I do. So it definitely was more challenging in some ways as a scholar because of the way I chose to do it. But I don't think that it was time wasted or an unnecessary exercise. Like, my dissertation defense was hard. And I had really, really respected and renowned scholars who came, because we have open defenses, and who came in support. And after they were like, girl, that was hard. So I don't think that, it was just an exercise in a title. I really do respect the work that I produced there.
I think that's important because people need to understand that the title of being a scholar, what that journey means, that identity, who you want to be, how you want to show up, can look different for different people, and that's okay, because we all come to graduate school for very different reasons. As a faculty member, you'd be surprised about the number of students that come and they're like, I'm like, oh, well, let's talk about your scholarship, or how do you see yourself impacting? And they're like, I'm here to get a good job. I want to do it for career advancement, and the theorizing and stuff just isn't always as present. And so I think different people, but the journey can change, and the journey changes us in doing that.
So I also want to answer your question about the interesting thing about writing Chickenheads, which is now 25 years old, and coming up with this intervention. See, I wouldn't have even said an intervention 25 years ago, but this intervention in Black feminist theory as a journalist and not a doctoral, a doctor, was, I always tell people, the very reason that Chickenheads has lasted as long as it has in the academy, that book wouldn't have been written if I had tried to write, if I had gotten the doctorate first. All of the things that people love about the language, the accessibility, the ability to curl up with the book, the ability to read it. I literally wrote it so that if you loved it, you could read it in 2 days, but it should never take you longer than 2 weeks. All of those things were deliberate craft choices that I made as a writer. Would have been beaten out of me, quite frankly, as a graduate student. And that book exists because I did not go to grad school. And so there's a real question to ask ourselves there. What are we, and by we, I mean in terms of the academy, what are we gatekeeping by not acknowledging these different forms of knowledge production, and by a really outdated mode of what we think an academic should be, even outdated modes of printing. It should not take, in an age of digital media, it should not take as long as it does for peer-reviewed articles to go into publication. It's absolutely ridiculous. It should not, the publishing model, and the first time I found out what scholars got paid for an academic monograph, I was like, I'm not writing that. I'm not. Writing is hard, it's difficult, and I expect to be paid for that labor. And so if I write a book, it's because I want to write a book. If the Pleasure Politics dissertation becomes a book, it's because I want it to be a book. But I'm absolutely not courting an academic press on that. That is ridiculous. the benchmark for what a successful number of copies sold in academia reflects the fact that you're producing work you don't expect people to read in mass. Those kinds of hypocrisies have to be called out, and they need to be addressed if these institutions want to continue to survive, particularly with the kind of political climate that we're facing, where some of our research interests are definitely going to be under attack.
I think that's exactly what a lot of the sessions this week that people have been attending have really started to problematize that and interrogate the hierarchies, to interrogate what are the boundaries of scholarship and scholar identity. One of the things that's been a thread in your work in general is around how do we reinterrogate the theories that we've been leaning on. I am not as eloquent as you are in talking, but you talk about like, how do we make sure that even critiquing your own work of hip-hop feminism, you're like, this wouldn't be written in this way right now, and that's why other scholars have critiqued it, and I invite them to, and I'm gonna come back and critique it and say, how does this meet our social contemporary needs? And so I do think that that's really important, and we're starting to see that work being done in terms of community public scholarship being more integrated in terms of tenure and promotion processes. What does that look like to be in the blogs and the opinions, op-eds and stuff like that? So I definitely think that you're absolutely correct, and that's one of the things. You've also mentioned around, and I have quotes because that's who I am, is that you talked about in Chickenhead, and I'm gonna go through the thing, right? So in Chickenhead, you said, if feminism intends to have any relevance in the lives of a majority of Black women, if it intends to move past theory and become functional, it has to rescue itself from the ivy towers of academia. And then you talked about, even in Pleasure Politics, about the reinterrogations of the work, literature, and theory with the temporal cultural specificity reflected in the contemporary US. And so that's so what would be some of your strategies for how we do this, and whose responsibility is it for expanding the boundaries of who can create knowledge?
Okay, that's a big question. Let me
I remember 17. I'm the 17 line
it's okay.
sentence
it's okay.
in a
It's
manuscript.
Okay. So one of the things I recognized that I was able to do was challenge the spaces that I was in as a graduate student, because I was coming in with a great deal of privilege. Like, people were teaching my book in the department that I was getting a graduate degree in. So I could say things that maybe a 24-year-old would be far less inclined to say, and not really worry about repercussion, because like, I wanted to do graduate school in a very particular way. I only applied to NYU, and I figured if I didn't get into NYU American Studies, I wasn't going, right? And I kind of approached graduate school the same way, that it had to serve the particular intellectual interest while I was there, or it wasn't worth the extreme amount of effort and time. That said, I do think that it was part of my responsibility to challenge certain things, to ask questions that other people might have not felt empowered to ask. I have really strong relationships, collegial relationships with other scholars who I have seen gone from junior scholars to full scholars, and I have seen them take the weight and the brunt of it to say things and ask the junior scholars, don't step out in the potential line of fire here. You know, let me do it. I'm full, I'm tenured. The repercussions for me are not gonna be the same as the repercussions for you. I think that those kind of strategies are really very, very important. And I do think they work. Like, I see graduate students who are having a very different experience than I did in 2010, right? When I first entered. Even from like what they thought was appropriate to wear, you know, or even talk about. in academic spaces or in conferences has shifted quite a bit. And I think that, you know, when you can take the weight, you should carry a little bit of the weight and not leave it up to the people who have the most to risk and the least protection to stand directly in that way. You know, as far as hip-hop feminism and how it functions in the academy, it's really interesting because everyone assumed I was going to do something in hip-hop studies. My dissertation is not in hip-hop studies. I've never taken a course in hip-hop studies. Quite frankly, I don't know why I would go to graduate school when the foundation of hip-hop studies is based on the work that those journalists and myself came up with. So why would you go to graduate school to get a PhD to study yourself? I'm already had a process of having to cite myself in graduate school. So I have really stepped back. But Brittany Cooper has a Rage Lab at Rutgers University, and they just did a day-long symposium on the 25th anniversary of hip-hop feminism, and I was blown away about the ways that scholars have been able to take up hip-hop feminism, really bring it into 2024, you know, into 21st century, interrogate what they need to, criticize what they need to, use what they need to, and build on the theory to advance it. That's what good scholarship is. And I think particularly in Black feminist theory, because we have such a, we hold our scholars and our feminist elders quite dear, it makes us very reluctant to interrogate the theory. We treat it like it's religious dogma, and it's not. Theory is meant to be unsettled. It is meant to be questioned. I came into the academy doing that. Chickenheads was not a beloved book for like a long time. My feminist elders were not particularly happy with me, but I think that that's okay. Like I don't, my interventions are not my identity. They're not how I walk through the world. They're not what I think about when I'm making love, how I'm raising my child, about any of those things. Challenge it. My ego is not invested in that at all. And I often find that because your ability to make interventions really has so much to do with the way that you move the academy, it unleashes a lot of unhealthy ego.
That's a word and a sermon, and so we could take all day to unpack that, because that is absolutely, so I appreciate, again, calling, because that's what we're here at the conference for, is to share our work and to get feedback and critique, and not everyone's gonna vibe with it, and how do we increase the levels of theorization. And so I think it's important that we hear that. I want to go back to one of the things that you talked about in terms of, and then I want to, as we find it, I want to move to some of the current work that you're doing, is we talked about, you said that expanding the boundaries, and the local committee, I'm not sure the correct title for this, but the local community in ASHE created a Spotify playlist to kind of give I guess to amplify Minneapolis as a site of cultural and artistic hub, and to get a sense of place. And so that really thinks back into like even where hip-hop feminism and some of these other things, where do you see as of how music and social media, how do those serve as sites for scholarly exploration, but also to talk about storytelling and the generation of research ideas and scholarly interests that people might want to pursue? So music and social media, how does that play into what we can, our work and our scholarship?
It's a difficult question because I taught before I became a graduate school student. I also taught while I was a graduate student. I did a visiting at the end of my graduate school career at NYU. I was part of that group of scholars and teachers who were teaching when New York was hit with COVID in the way that it was hit. And prior to that, my answer would be, I need to meet my students where they are. So at the time, you know, from Tumblr to, I stopped at TikTok, but Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, what was then Twitter, on all of it because I need to understand how, as opposed to being adversarial to it, I need to understand and see how you're gleaning information, and still encourage you to use those sites, but not negate that there still has to be a scholarly rigor to the work that you're doing. And so I tried to, one of the things that I did was try to, in my own pedagogy, was to assign rigorous readings, but also allow the assignments to be creative. So I assign playlists. I assign, research projects that might have been based around a Tumblr with a supportive 5-page paper, or you could do a 30-page paper if you wanted to. I gave you the choice. People often found that the 30-page paper was easier because of the amount of rigor that you would have to bring to the project with the 5-page paper. But I felt like that was my job in the classroom. I think in this moment, we have to really deal with the fact that our students are not reading. They're not reading. Like, I'm getting colleagues, I'm not teaching. My position at NYU now is I run the Center for Black Visual Culture with Dr. Deborah Willis. So I'm not in the classroom, but my colleagues from all over are telling me that their students are freaking out about a 238-page text because they have not been assigned full books in junior high school and high school. That's something that the academy cannot continue to ignore and just turn a blind eye to it and then expect professors to kind of deal with it to do the catch-up work. What are our admission standards are gonna be? And they can't just be, they have to be what they are before, because these kids are getting information in a radically different way. If you're not reading, obviously your writing skills are impaired, your critical analysis skills are impaired. So it requires a real assessment of where we are in this moment. Are we gonna require summer readings, mandatory summer readings, as contingent on your admission? Like, what are we doing? But I cannot tell you how many of my teaching scholar friends right now are in real crisis.
I joined the number. I think, I appreciate having the blended opportunities, because there are a lot of students that we have, like you said, meet students where they are and how they've been learning and where they're getting their thoughts and process from. So to allow for artistic expression and creativity, also helps to model what we're talking about, is because at the end of the day, you're not gonna have to write 30-page papers after you leave, depending on where you want to go, but it can still be rigorous, it can still be scholarly, it can still make impact and contribution. And so hopefully your students have really been appreciating those types of opportunities. So I wanna talk about some of the work that you're doing currently in your center. First, for those of us that may not know exactly what the Center for Visual Black Culture is, can you tell us about the center at NYU? And then I'd love to hear specifically about the Black Rest Project.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the very beginning because it has a lot to do with why I'm not in a tenure track position, and that was a deliberate choice. I defended December 13th, 2019. Right? And we know what happened immediately after, which gave me a lot of time to think because there was no market to really go on. And I just knew that as much as I love the classroom, I had a significant, I basically have been teaching in university since 1999. So it wasn't like I was a graduate student who wanted to graduate itching to be back at, teaching, although that is my happy place. In terms of being a scholar, is teaching. I also knew that I just was not gonna write another academic paper. I didn't wanna write for another academic journal. I certainly was not gonna write another academic monograph, because I, at the end of the day, am a writer, and I'm gonna be 60 in a couple of months. So that means that this particular period of my writing time is the legacy work, and that work has to be for me. It's not a critique or a refutation of academia per se. I clearly still work at an academic institution, but I just wasn't willing to give it any more of my writing time. And that was just a real some gut analysis to realize that that would make me really unhappy. My pledge process was finished in my head. However, I had one of the most brilliant dissertation committees, and on my dissertation committee was Dr. Deborah Willis, who was my professor and also a mentor for me throughout my graduate career, because she was a scholar artist and really understood who I was as a scholar artist, as a single mom who was in graduate school at the time. She did the same thing. We actually both went back to graduate school in our 40s, and so she was a real mentor for me. The Institute for African American Affairs is a little more than 50 years old at NYU. And while I was there, she, as a graduate student, she had founded the Center for Black Visual Culture and is the director of both spaces. And so while we were all sitting home, she called me and she said, listen, I really need a thought partner at the center. Would you consider coming in and being my number? And I didn't even really let her get to 2 before I was like, absolutely. And so in many ways, working with Deb and doing the programming for the center, we're an international diasporic center, which means our work takes place in the United States, but also throughout Europe and on the continent. We just had a conference in Paris. We've done conferences in Florence, in Venice, in South Africa, any number of places. And because I am Jamaican born, being part of a diasporic center and exploring global Blackness and the impact of images on global Black people is really a sweet and a happy space for me. I also, another beautiful thing about graduate school, I always knew as a writer that I was a visual person. I actually still write most of my manuscripts by hand. I don't go to a computer until I actually start to compose. I physically move chapters around on, like, if this, you know, I need to, this chapter 2 look right over here with this title, and that's how I don't cut and paste. I literally don't compose until it's, get on the computer until it's time to compose. And when I'm stuck, museums are my happy place. So I just spent a lot of time not realizing that I was a visual culture person until Deb had me actually include it in my dissertation. And so I've been able to really formalize this interest that I have and be able to bring my skills as a cultural critic, but also a curator and a connector. Which is something that I've done throughout. I'm on the board for an organization called the National Foundation of Young Arts, and before I joined the board, I was responsible for their master classes for all of their writers for about 10 years. And so I'm really good at putting very high impact collaborations together with people, and I'm good at programming. And so Deb saw that in me way before I saw that in me. And so that's the kind of work that we're able to do. One of the things that I wanted to do when I got there is that, and honestly, this was also a reflection of what my intentions are for the center in terms of being able to ask for different levels of funding. I realized that the center was doing very impactful work, but it was looked at as like one-offs, and we needed a project that was like 3 to 5 years to be considered for certain kinds of funding sources. And so Deb and I came out of COVID exhausted. The thing about virtual programming is that you can do a lot more virtual programming than you can do in-person programming. And I look back at how, you know, we were doing programs every week, sometimes twice a week during COVID, and it was an insane workload. Now I look back and I don't really know how we got through it, and we came out exhausted.
It was a season of overwork for especially people of color, minoritized populations, but the dual pandemic. So
yeah,
absolutely.
And you know, part of it is the pressure to constantly when you're people of color, scholars of color, you have centers, you have to continue to prove that your impact, right? Because the second that you don't have impact, you're jeopardizing your existence in many ways. And so we came out exhausted. I had just read Tricia Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance. Big fan of the Nat Bishop. And I said to Deb, what if we used this model and really committed 3 to 5 years with joined really, we have really strong collaborative partners in an advisory council at UCLA, the Ohio State, USC, Rutgers. We have community art organizations and national art organizations, Young Arts, Diaspora Vibes, Commissioner, all in Miami, and then Zora's House in Ohio, Maroon Arts Program in Ohio, are some of our Brother and Sister Soul in New York. And I was like, what if we got all of these people from different areas to really think through Rex as a praxis and as a resistance praxis? And so that has been the model for our programming for the last 3 years. And we've been able to support other programming. So there's now programming in Ohio. There are things that have happened in Miami. There are other efforts we're launching a podcast actually next spring. And so the thought was to initially, for me to bring these people together, but also encourage them to take it back to their home institutions or their own organizations, and to also build meaningful collaborations with each other. So the last thing we just did was, there's a conference that that I actually started going to as a graduate school student called Migration and Translation that Deb Willis started. And so the Black Rest Project did Rest in Translation, was one of the panels on that conference. And our last, at least for NYU, our last event will be to bring scholars, activists, artists together in hopefully Florence, Italy, because we have NYU Florence. And Justin Randolph has also been working on Rest and Repose there. He's the architect of Florence's Black History Month. And we will, I was just in Amsterdam at the Black Archives. They're doing their own Rest is Resistance. And so we're gonna bring together these folk and do a format of 15-minute presentations, audience feedback, and then we're gonna turn that into a book. And that will be the final project. We had Tricia Hersey in as an artist in residence, and we have a gallery space at 20 Cooper, so producing visual culture is a big part of our mission. And so, it's been a really great way to model enjoyable labor within an academic space, but also working within the resources of the academy, which is very anti-rest, I should say, and taking that work outside of the academy within a meaningful way.
Yes, to all that. I think as we think about where we are I have two kind of questions that came up for me when there's a lot of stuff on the internet. Google it. It's very interesting work. You can go back and see some of the events that they've done. So how we know, in light of this political climate, I remember during 2020 when all of my sister scholar friends and sister friends were retweeting the Nat Ministry. Everywhere you saw it, right? Rest is Resistance. How are you doing this? And now we see it after our recent elections. And so how do you, or what are some of the things in your work and through the center's work, what are some of the strategies that you are kind of amplifying for how do we balance the activism with the self-care, with the rest, so how do we do that? What are some strategies that y'all have been talking about that might be helpful for our group?
I mean, in some ways our strategies haven't changed. Like, part of Rest is Resistance is really about a resistance practice, particularly for Black and brown people, that actually gives back, that actually makes you stronger to go out and fight again. Dr. Treva Lindsay presented in Paris and talked about the fact that this moment, rest is absolutely necessary because we need the construction of new freedom dreams, that they can't look like what they have looked like previously. And while the impetus will be towards we have to fight even harder, we're saying we have to rest even harder. And redefine really what rest looks like, but also, and this is not a center mandate, but just for myself, like, I don't think that anyone should feel compelled to sacrifice mental and spiritual well-being to fight in the ways that we used to fight. So for myself, that's honestly been, as an immigrant, and not having any trust for where these new immigration policies are going to go. And I should say I've been a citizen since I was 9, and I'm still worried about it. I look for places I go when I travel, where's my resting heart rate? Where can I reimagine home? Because I come from a people who had to reimagine home and realize that while my parents thought I might never have to do that, that's something that I might have to do. Where are the places in the world that are in line with the values that I hold dear? And I think that it means allowing yourself to dream a larger, more radical imaginary. I'm encouraging Black folk to think of themselves as citizens of the world, as global citizens. That has been the work of CBVC since its inception. So in some ways, we're leaning in harder to what was already there. But I think that this is gonna take real self-care and not in a manufactured self-care industry kind of way. I'm not talking about like massages and facials. I'm not even talking about like group retreats. Trisha Hersey always says retreats don't really work because then you come back and you just fall into the practices that you have already done. I'm talking about real disruptions. And to think about our labor and what our labor enables and what would stop in its tracks if we no longer did that labor. So I'm thinking about a really radical reimagining that is not possible without rest and self-attention.
And I want to do one little thread. So one of the things that ASHE has been doing as a organization, but we also see it specifically in one of the things I think so many of us in this room appreciate about your work and your history is that you have always been about Black women empowerment and really trying to see the experiences, interrogate and amplify that. And so specifically around rest and Black women, is there anything specific that you see for not only for Black women to do themselves, but also for people to be allies toward and co-conspirators with Black women in rest and self-care and well-being?
So I have two thoughts. One is that no is a complete sentence. Mm-hmm. It's a complete sentence. Mm-hmm. And so much of why we don't rest has a lot to do with not just the ask, but our inability and our guilt around saying no and using it as a complete sentence. Boundaries work, and it's up to us to set them and reinforce them because no one is gonna do that for us. No one cares about us in that way that's gonna set the boundaries for us. But allyship, honestly, is a really tricky thing for me in this moment. Allyships take work, and I'm not invested in that work. I am not invested in that work. Like, I am very clear that I'm not doing work with white feminists around voting. That is work that I have said over and over again. You need to go get your sisters and get them information. We don't have this issue. I was one of the people who, of course, once, Kamala got the nomination, everybody fell into formation because Black people, that's what we do. But I had real doubts about whether white women would elect a female president because we saw how they voted with Hillary. So I'm not doing allyship because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of foundation, it's a lot of frustration a lot of times, but also the work, I'm trying to fix something that I'm already very clear on. So I think real allyship means go in your corner and work with your people.
I think that's important. I think it's important for us to hear and for people to take part in. So we have a couple, like 2 minutes. And so I always end with, like, when I'm in class, I'm like, are all hearts and minds clear? It gives people an opportunity to ask questions, clarify. You've come here, you've learned about our organization, but you're also, like you said, you're a thinker, you're a writer, you're an innovator, you're creative. Like, what would you like to leave us with, and for us to either a question to ponder, a challenge? What would you like to end our time together with today?
Shout out to non-traditional scholars. You know, shout out to scholars who come to the Academy after completely different lives. I think that we bring something really important, which is perspective. I think that we are very clear about why we want a thing, but we're also not overly enchanted with what the Academy is to the point where we're not able to critique it. I think that people need to make more space for non-traditional scholars because they bring something actually really grounding and important to the space. Many of the non-traditional scholars that I know who were admitted during my time during grad school had full careers. And were already doing work that in some ways or another had been inculcated in the Academy anyway. I think that that's really important, and to think expansively about the invitations as to who belongs in the space and who doesn't.
That is an excellent way to end our time together. Oh, and we did great on time too. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing more about what you're doing. I think that all of us will now be logging on to see how we can also learn more and participate. So thank you so much for being here today, and thank you all for
Thank you
coming.
so much for having me.
Hello, my name is Michael Stephen Williams. I'm a chocolate-colored black man wearing a black suit and a black t-shirt. It brings me great pleasure to just offer deep thanks for this conversation. Dr. Morgan, Dr. Davis, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for the challenge for all of us to think about the legibility of our work and the places that we're creating for people to feel like they belong in scholarly communities. I find it inspiring and exciting, and you gave us so much beautiful ideas to sit with and think about. So thank you. I feel kind of torn because this just happened, but earlier this year, Dr. Jenny Hart, our current ASHE president, asked me if I'd be interested in chairing the Professional Development Committee. And I knew that I couldn't say no. And so I'm sorry, I went against the NAP ministry. But besides not being able to tell Jenny no, I was really inspired because somebody that made space for the ideas that were really important to me around mentoring, Dr. Gloria Crisp, had served in the role for 3 years before, and so I knew I had a real opportunity to continue and push that work forward. Over the past year, members of the ASHE Professional Development Committee have been meeting with people who are responsible for the suite of professional development programs across the organization to understand how best we can support and connect their work so that people have a space where they feel like they belong across ASHE, no matter how they come to us. Over the next year, the ASHE Professional Development Committee will be releasing a framework of what we believe our members' professional development needs and how the association either already does or will, because we're dedicated to updating and expanding in meaningful ways, meet those needs. ASHE has a tremendous menu of professional development offerings for members at all career stages, and we're looking forward to enhancing these offerings in meaningful ways in coming years.
Hello again, everyone. My name is Alicia Castillo-Shrestha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Latina woman with black hair, little sparkles of silver in the front. I'm wearing glasses and my ASHE long sleeve blue shirt, so shout out to the merch store. Check it out if you haven't yet. But I'm here to thank Michael, thank you so much, wherever you are, for your leadership of the Professional Development Committee. We also want to thank the leaders of all of these wonderful events for the labor of love that y'all put into these. It's very much appreciated and seen by the many, many attendees that participate. Each of these events has presenters and panelists who provide a service to the event, but not more broadly the field. This year, more than 100 members served as panelists or presenters at a professional development event. On behalf of the association, we thank you. Throughout the year, more than a third of ASHE members attend a professional development event. Whether you're a grad student, early career scholar, mid-career scholar, a senior scholar, non-traditional scholar, we invite you to think about how ASHE can best support you. I encourage you to check out these events and save the dates for our 2025 offerings.
Thank you, Alicia. I want to add my thanks to the event leaders and panelists. My attendance at the Policy Forum and the Early Career Faculty Workshop are powerful things that reminded me not only how important they are, but that have kept me in the field and created some of the communities that I still value and get to benefit from today. I'm so excited to hear from so many of you how important these events have been for you as well, providing tools for you to be successful in the academy, and also giving you an opportunity to network and continue to develop your larger community. So, got to give a shout out. I hope to see you at an event soon, and those of you with the particular expertise, hope to get you involved in the leadership of those events as well. So thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.